happens to be a different kind of corn. Corn for people is going to be, there's going to be less of it, and at this point, one of the few conclusions of economics actually works. The price will go up. Okay, so yeah, price goes up. That means the price of feed for cattle goes up. The price of those products goes up, and you see it at the supermarket. Oh yeah, it goes up in Mexico. You can't eat, and it's worse than that. Part of the goal of NAFTA was to drive Mexican farmers off the land, so that Mexico would become dependent on U.S. agribusiness exports. Agribusiness means highly subsidized agribusiness exports. So the government highly subsidizes agribusiness, and of course, Mexican campesino can be as efficient as they want. They can't compete. So they have two choices: either switch to specialty crops, which is what economists tell them you're supposed to do. It's what comparative advantage tells them you're supposed to do if your mind is distorted enough. But become dependent on U.S. agribusiness, or else flee. So you end up crossing the Mexican border. It's not coincidental that Clinton militarized the border in 1994, the same year as NAFTA. They militarized it because they could predict the effects. I'd been an open border before, and now they're militarizing even more, and there's a big debate in Congress. But it's worse than that. When corn for, even after losing food independence, you're dependent on what the big guy decides. And if the United States decides to increase the price of corn because it wants an ethanol industry, Mexicans are no longer able to produce their own corn, and even if they do, industrial producers in Mexico will buy it because it's cheaper for the industrial producers than the U.S. corn that's going up. So then you don't have corn for tortillas, so you have tortilla riots. And it's expected to happen. The whole ethanol thing is mostly a scam. It's probably not even fuel efficient. But it cannot exist unless there's massive state intervention, and the effects are very widespread. Could become much worse. For example, it's already happening in the poorer countries of the world, that they're shifting production from, say, palm oil or cassava, which is the staple in much of Africa, to ethanol. Okay, because then, the big producers, agribusiness will buy it, and the U.S. producers will buy it. Well, you do that, it could be massive starvation. This is not a radical view, incidentally. You can read about it in the current issue of Foreign Affairs.
You talked about when the Dodge brothers sued Ford for wanting to make a more affordable car, and I think part of Ford's perspective was just a self-interest. He wanted to have consumers still who could be able to afford to buy the products. Do you have any speculation on if these guys continue?
They won, remember?
Yeah. If these guys continue to, obviously, Ford's perspective didn't last to today.
It didn't last till 1916 because the Supreme Court shut it down. The Supreme Court ruled that what happened is, I think it was 1916 or roughly then, Ford, which was individually owned, was producing cheap cars and paying workers what were, by those standards, decent wages. And the Ford company was sued by two of its stockholders, the Dodge brothers, who were planning to start a car company, Dodge. Ford was sued because they were producing cheap cars and paying high wages, and that they won at the court. Supreme Court ruled that Ford alone was a corporation, that Ford was incorporated. Ford, a corporation, must have only one goal: maximizing profit and market share. They are not permitted by law to do anything decent. There was an exception. If the television was anachronistic, if the press is there, today the television cameras are there, then you can do something benevolent because it improves your image. But you can only, so again, it indirectly increases profit. But otherwise, corporations which were given personal rights have to be what we would call pathological persons. In fact, the courts have gone so far as to, there are cases in the United States where, same in Britain really, but there's cases in the United States where the courts have urged corporations to carry out some, benevolent acts, because otherwise, I'm quoting it now, otherwise an aroused public may discover the benefits that the state is providing to corporate entities, and they'll take away those rights. So to prevent an aroused public from learning about the scam, you better do some good works. That's Delaware Court in 1969 or so. So yeah, the Dodge brothers won that case. But that remains the core principle of corporate law.
I have a question as far as you discussed earlier where the 50s were a time of containment, where you had the culture of conformity. You moved to the 60s and 70s, a liberation, an awakening of sorts. The 80s, I don't know what the hell happened there. Until today, no, seriously, and common sense with the 15-year-old would dictate that it's just common sense. You know why he's going to pick up the gun. Regarding corporate media, do you think that it's so efficient now? Because they don't even use distractions now. With the case of like Alberto Gonzalez and him going to the hospital bed of the Ashcroft. People read that, which is so blatantly against the Constitution. And people will read it and say, but at least the White House called you more, so that's okay. Our civil liberties don't count. Are people more complacent, or is corporate media winning, or people are just really stupid?
I don't think people are stupid. People do feel helpless. So yeah, to an extent, the propaganda systems work. On the other hand, I don't think it's worked that well. And you can tell that by popular attitudes, which are quite different than they were in the 50s and the 60s. And as I said, there's plenty of activism. You didn't have anything like Z Media Institute in the 50s, or anything that, or you didn't have it in the 70s and the 80s. These are all new things. So yes, people do feel helpless. To that extent, the corporate media are succeeding. But I think they're better. It's a pretty hard thing to measure, but my feeling is they're better than they were 50 or 60 years ago, more open, because the country's changed. And, the media changed just the way the country does. And so do the educational institutions. They're not, even in a totalitarian society, you cannot totally ignore the public mood. You have to kind of accommodate to it. And a more free society, even more so. But of course, there will, remember, capital is constantly fighting a bitter class war. They never stop. They're constantly fighting a war, and they're very class conscious. The United States happens to have a highly class conscious business class. To an unusual extent, it's a business-run society, always fighting a bitter class war. If everyone else lets them get away with it, they'll get away with what they can. But I think it's harder now than it was for them, easier for us.